Show is brought to you by Interesting Radio. You can find all our shows over at interestingradio.nz.
We're born with a natural curiosity, and we have an open mind. We want to learn things. We want to learn how to...
And I am not a visionary. I do not have a 5-year plan. I'm an engineer, and I think
Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you plugged in a new device, and it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build... Whoa.
Hello and welcome to Tech Explainers.
Hello, Dan.
Hello, how's it going?
Not bad, not bad. You've been well.
Yeah, I quite like that clip at the end, the the plug and play or plug and pray.
Yeah,
fail.
That was a USB scanner, wasn't it? Back in USB 1.1 days, I think, wasn't it?
I think it might have even been a parallel scanner because this is Windows 98.
That's risky.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm sure we'll talk about that one day.
No doubt we will. My parents have also suggested a couple of topics.
Oh, do they listen?
Yes.
Uh-oh.
So they've asked for online storage, iCloud and Dropbox.
Hey, that's a good
all
idea.
That kind of stuff. And computer hardware. So why should you not go to the store and buy a $400 laptop and expect it to work?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a story.
Okay. Actually, I'm worried now, but go on.
I'm going to tell you a story.
The story isn't about how your studio's been rebuilt yet again, is it, Dan?
Oh, thanks, mate. It has been rebuilt again and has been improved.
It does look much tidier over there.
Yeah, I've even put fabric over all the wood, and it's like a proper MDF desk, which I measured.
Once or twice?
About 5 times.
Oh, very good.
I'm really, really bad at woodwork.
Yeah, what do they say? Measure twice, cut once?
Yeah, exactly. It's also full of probably 200 screws.
Okay, right. Anyway, you were going to tell me a story. Where you go?
I was. So I'm going to tell you about the $25 million kiss.
Okay.
And how is that related, Mike wonders? Well, you'll find out. I'm going to tell you about Hedy Lamarr. And she was married to an Austrian arms merchant during kind of around the time of the Second World War. But she wasn't particularly happy with this guy because she was just the quiet wife in the corner, and she'd attend all the dinner parties and listen to them talking about, all the bombs that were being dropped and all that kind of stuff. So she fled to Paris in 1937, and she was discovered as an actor by an agent from Hollywood. So she moved to the US in 1938.
It's a long way from Wi-Fi, Dan.
I know, I'm getting there. So what she did is she was actually also an inventor as well as an actor.
Cool.
So she filed a patent for radio frequency spectrum hopping.
There we go.
1942. And being the patriotic woman that she was to the US, she donated the patent. Oh, I got the heater on.
Can you hear it?
Probably, but I'm not starting again. Being the patriotic woman that she was, she donated the patent to the US military. But at the time, the US military didn't really care about suggestions from outside because they were, so busy trying to, work out all their own things.
Okay.
So, yeah, they pretty much ignored her. But then they tested it in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis and went, oh, wow, it actually works.
We should have used this.
Exactly. And, yeah, so the $25 million kiss is that they went, yeah, we're not interested. So she went, well, how else can I help the war effort? So what she did is, during the war, they'd go around and sell war bonds.
Right.
So she would say that anyone that bought $25,000 worth of war bonds, she would kiss.
Oh, wow.
And in New York, one night, she made $7 million.
Oh, in those days, $25,000 is a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
And, yeah, in the end, she raised about $25 million for the war.
Oh, good on her.
Yeah. So
it's not really the $25 million kiss, it's the $25 million worth of kisses.
Indeed. So what's the point of my story? Well, radio frequency spectrum hopping
Yep.
is, I guess, the basis for our topic today, which is Wi-Fi, which would not be possible without it.
So are we going to explain hopping? Very simply.
Yeah, we can do that.
Have you prepared something to explain it?
I haven't.
Or the simplest way to think about it, I guess, is if you think about your radio in your car and you're listening to the station on the way into work, frequency hopping is where in a predefined order, your radio automatically chops and changes to this station, and that station, and that station, and that station.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that you're listening to different signals, it's that the stations are all knowing to swap around at the right time as well. So the other end is swapping around, and so it's all about changing the frequency, but the information is still the same. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah, close enough. It's a roughly idea of what it's doing. You're still transferring information, but both ends, both the transmitter and the receiver, are both changing frequency, and then it keeps sending the same information.
Yeah, anyway, little plug for Mike Rowe's podcast, The Way I Heard It.
Okay.
Because that's where I heard the story of Hedy Lamarr. And yeah, it's a really awesome podcast. The way he structures it is he tells you the story, and right at the end, he tells you what he's talking about.
Ah, okay,
So you
that's
get
interesting.
you get that kind of aha, I suddenly know what he's talking about moment.
And it all falls into place. Yeah,
exactly. It's a really awesome format, but yeah, that one made me go, whoa, really? Because I'd never heard of her until that podcast.
And being that I'm looking at the same notes as you on a different screen, that must be episode 1, is it?
Sure is.
Wow.
It funnily enough, it actually jumped back into the feed because I think he's up to about episode 60 now, but episode 1 showed up a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Don't know why, but yeah, it was kind of fortuitous timing because I was able to use it in this podcast.
Oh, brilliant. There you go. What's the name? Mike. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Right, so before I continue on with the history, let's have a very quick introduction on what is Wi-Fi.
Yep.
Everyone kind of knows it is, you get your Wi-Fi router from your ISP, and it means you can sit on your phone or your computer without having a pesky cable plugged in.
That's right.
I remember the days of running network cables through my parents' house, much to their...
I remember running network cables that were totally not up to grade in my flat when I was a young fella, because back then proper Cat 5 or Cat 5e at the time was quite expensive. It was still a couple of $3 a meter or something. It was sort of added up after a while. Now that it's a few cents, it's crazy. But no, I was using the old Category 3 cable, which is, but I was putting 10 megabit, 10 megabit over it, and it still worked, but it was free.
Yeah, I have a couple of clients that have Cat 3 in their walls.
Oh, well,
and we have to force the switches to talk at 10 megabit because otherwise it just doesn't work.
Doesn't even work at 100.
No.
Oh, sure.
Because the switches are so new that they go, what the hell is this? What are you trying to do to me? So I think with our internet podcast, we kind of talked about the layers, the OSI model a little bit. So basically, you have the physical layer, and then you have kind of the data link or the communication layer.
Right.
And those two layers are the only two that are different between Wi-Fi and a normal cable.
Yeah.
Everything else is the same.
Yeah, so we didn't really touch on it in the internet podcast to sort of explain it a little bit better, but the physical layer, as we call it, the very bottom layer, is the one that links the layers between different ends of a communication. So you can see the physical connection with a bit of wire, right? It's plugged in here and plugged in there. That's the physical layer.
So Wi-Fi is also physical.
That's right, it is. So with Wi-Fi, the physical layer is the oxygen and atmosphere between you and there. Well, the electromagnetic spectrum. Yeah, is the radio frequency. Yeah, that's right. So there is still a physical layer, but it's invisible.
Yeah. And it uses what we call unlicensed frequencies, which means that anyone can use it. Because there are a lot of licensed frequencies as well.
That's almost true.
Oh, home Wi-Fi.
No. All frequencies, anything that transmits a radio frequency has to be licensed in some form or another.
Yeah.
So, yes, they're actually in what I call public use bands. So they're actually been pre-licensed for all of the equipment that's going to use them up to a certain level, right? So your AM radio station, which is out of the city, actually in Dunedin here, they're up on the peninsula, big tall towers. They're talking, hundreds of watts up into the kilowatts, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to explain, radio frequency powers, because I do a bit of radio stuff, but
Yeah.
It's hard to explain how to equate that, but we're talking, hundreds and thousands of watts to thousandths of watts with Wi-Fi. So we're down at, milliwatts. It's a tiny amount. So, in those public use bands, there's a limit on how much power you can use. That's why your Wi-Fi signal doesn't actually work, at work to home.
Yeah.
if you had a high enough signal and a big enough antenna, then yes, you could use your home Wi-Fi at work. But the interference with everybody else in the city, you'd never be able to do anything. So hence why they're smaller power, less. Yeah. We'll get into that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about interference and everything later on as well.
Yeah.
But I guess the two most common frequencies for home, at least, are 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. And, around that area, obviously there's more specific frequencies down to the megahertz level, but when you're talking about them generally, you call them that, roundabout at least.
That's right. So I guess we could talk about frequencies a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
AM radio stations are down in the kilohertz, right down the very bottom.
Yes.
If you think of a great big spectrum going from, because a frequency is a wave, and with a hertz meaning per second, or cycles per second. So thousands of cycles per second is kilohertz, or kilo being 1,000. Megahertz goes from 1 megahertz right up to 1 gigahertz, which is 1,000 megahertz.
Yeah.
And within that, we've got TV, old style TV and new style TV. So digital TV is still in that area.
Yeah.
Your FM broadcast stations, aviation radio, so all of the planes that are flying around use that. They're up about 100, 130, 125, 130 megahertz. We've got radio frequencies for police and for ambulances and fire and all that sort of stuff. And then you start moving a little bit further up, you've got cell phones in there as well. Well, one set of the cell phone frequencies, until you get up into the gigahertz. And that's when you start to get into satellite stuff and for radio frequencies for high-speed communications. And you need that higher frequency to get the throughput.
Yeah. So, and not to mention microwave ovens.
Yes, that's right. And last episode we talked about GPS, and it's in a similar area. So just around the gigahertz area, it's not too far off. And then you work your way and you keep going further up into multi-high numbers of gigahertz, and that's what the guys are using with their radio telescopes and things. So
yeah, and thank you for that segue. Speaking of radio telescopes, have you heard the story about the radio telescope that was seeing really strange frequencies at strange times?
I think I have, but I might have forgotten the story.
Yeah, so there was this, I can't remember where it was, but the radio telescope farm, and they were getting inexplicable signals that they couldn't explain from, any reasonable explanation. So they're going, well, is it coming from, extraterrestrials? And no, it was when people were using the microwave in the break room and opening the door before it was finished.
Oh, excellent.
So just a little bit of microwave
little blip.
was escaping.
Yeah, that's what they do say, be careful with those microwave things. Radio frequencies are harmful technically, so
yeah,
and high enough power. So anyway, sorry, a little bit off track there. Let's go back to where were we? We were talking about 2.4 gigs and 5 gigs.
Yes. Right, so that's probably a pretty good summary. So let's go back to the history, shall we? Yeah, so we'll go back to the history. And it started with AlohaNet in 1971. Now, any guesses as to where AlohaNet was used?
Siberia.
No, incorrect. Try again.
Hawaii.
Yes.
Oh, okay. There we
go. Yes, so AlohaNet was used around Hawaii in 1971, and that's one of the first really recorded uses of radio frequency communication for, that's not
digital.
Satellites, for digital communications.
Okay.
And then NCR and AT&T brought in what was probably the closest precursor to Wi-Fi, which was WaveLAN.
Yeah, I remember that. Very, very, very small amount of that. There was a at one point, people were talking about doing waveland links, long distance links. So, yeah. Was it
The
not pointing up enough, or?
No, it was kind of pointing to the side of your face rather than.
Oh, okay. However, I just go back to that. Sorry. Right. Yeah. So, waveland links. I remember that being talked about when I was younger, but little bit in the early period of my doing IT stuff and around that area. So
Yeah, so because it was NCR, it was, point of sale systems and things like that was using it. Yeah. And then the first kind of Wi-Fi was in 1997, and that's when the IEEE 802.11 standard began.
which ends up being the baseline for, Wi-Fi as we know it, yeah.
Yeah. IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers.
Yes, IEEE comes up a lot in IT.
Yes, they produce a lot of the standards, or they ratify
Correct.
a lot of the standards that are in use, which means that if you have a Wi-Fi router from one vendor and a computer from the other, they can actually talk.
That's right.
Without the standards.
Standards are important.
Though, then you have Apple.
Are you think you're the same XKCD cartoon as I am?
No, I'm not actually.
Are you now?
Yeah, I am now. Apple don't quite follow the standard.
Surprise, surprise. Oh, sorry, I didn't say that.
Yeah, so to get the best performance out of your Apple devices, you have to have an Apple Wi-Fi router, which they've just made end of life.
No comment.
As you know, I had some rather high-end enterprise-grade access points, and my Apple devices just did not work with them. So now they're still on my roof with no power because I'm not using them.
Ceiling, Dan.
Yes.
Yeah, roof's outside, ceiling's inside.
Yes, okay. So in 1997, it was 1 and 2 megabits per second, so very, very slow. Because 802.11b, which supported 11 megabits, didn't come in until a few years later.
Man, it's like a tenfold increase. It was like, wow.
Yeah, 1 meg to 11.
Yeah, it's a big jump, but it's the Moore's law of computing, right? And I'm sure we'll touch onto that at some point or other and down the line. But it's just fascinating how the technology has gone from minuscule data volumes to huge. So, the way people used to, of course, do modems and dialing things up back in the 60s and 70s was with their acoustic coupler. So, acoustic coupler is it's a box with a couple of rubber cups on it that you'd put your old handset from your rotary dial telephone on, and these rubber cups were positioned in such a way that you'd be able to put the handset on there, so you'd use the rotary dial to dial a number for where you wanted to talk to, then you just put it down into the acoustic coupler and hope that it worked. Yeah. To get like 300 baud. So 300 baud is a a funny way of saying bits per second. It's not exactly bits per second, but so 300 is 300 bits per second, so divided by 8, that's how many characters per second you get. Yeah. So we're not talking bytes here or kilobytes per second. Your nice fast downloads at home, folks. Back then it was you waited a couple of hours to get that 100 kilobytes of email or whatever. Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah.
So and now here we are with multi-gigabit type connections to your desk and from the other side of the world, and so anyway, we're sitting back there about in the middle, one megabit to 10 megabit.
Yeah, so, Moore's law is actually becoming less true now.
That's right, it is. I suppose we should really explain it, as we mentioned a couple of times. So so the general gist of it is that growth of IT technology is supposedly exponential. It effectively doubles every period. 18 months, yeah. So
so every 18 months, cost halves and performance doubles.
That's right, yeah.
And that was true for a long time, but we're kind of getting to a bit of a plateau now.
Probably from the early to mid 80s through to 5-6 years ago. Yeah. And it's starting to plateau now, yeah. Yeah, now like AMD are bringing out processors with 64 cores in them. Yeah. Instead of increasing the speed, that's how they go, well, let's just not worry about the speed, leave where it is and just add more processors to the...
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I think the next step that we're going to see is going to be some fantastic, quantum-ish type stuff. Yeah. And it's going to be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, that's the next thing, with quantum computing.
Way off track. Anyway,
Yes, way off track.
802.11 and 802.11b.
Yes. 2009 was 802.11n, which gave you about 300 megabits per second.
Another big step up.
I've skipped G because I'm not going to go through every single one.
Right.
And then quite recently, 2013, 802.11ac, which is where you can get the kind of gigabit speeds out of it if you have the right equipment and you're sitting on top of the access point.
That's right. It's not perfect. There's so many variables in play when it comes to wireless. I mean, so one of those things that you occasionally do with your internet connection, right, is you want to do a test it, and someone say, "Oh, go and test it with the speed test thing." If you're going to do that, use a computer that's wired in, not one that's on Wi-Fi. It's not as reliable. You won't get the best result on Wi-Fi.
ISPs hate Wi-Fi.
Oh, of course they do. But the thing is, though, as most people will now be discovering, is that their internet connection now is literally just a router, a Wi-Fi router, and everybody now doesn't have a full computer. They've got tablets and phones and laptops,
exactly,
all on Wi-Fi.
And they don't need faster than what Wi-Fi at home can support.
That's right.
And you're actually finding that if you've got, say, a 2-year-old computer, the computer is going to be the slow point.
That's right.
You're actually going to hit the limit of the CPUs and being able to write to the memory fast enough.
It's taken a long time for internet connections to get to that point of being, held up by the computer. So more often than not, you're waiting on the internet connection. So
yeah, I've got an old laptop that's sitting on the desk beside you that's 3 years old, and it cannot do the full speed of my internet connection. It just hits CPU.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable. But yeah, if you take one thing out of this episode, it is do not use Wi-Fi for speed tests, especially if you're going to complain to your ISP.
That's right. Dead right.
And if you have fiber faster than 200 megabits and you don't get more than 200 megabits, too bad.
Yep. That's basically what it comes to. Righto. Okay. That's 802.11ac.
Yes. And yeah, a bit of a soapbox moment there for speed testing on Wi-Fi.
You didn't possibly happen to work for an industry where that came up, did you, Dan?
I did. And I have a couple of friends that all I see them complain about is that. Right, so let's talk about interference.
Okay.
2.4 gigahertz being the most common frequency for Wi-Fi because that's what came first, basically. Yep. Because now everybody pretty much has an internet connection with Wi-Fi.
Yep.
They set up their Wi-Fi router with the default settings and it just blares out 2.4 gigahertz signal and it's just everywhere.
It's everywhere, but it doesn't go everywhere because so this is this is a little bit of an introduction to radio as well because Wi-Fi is so deeply ingrained in radio that it's important to know. But so the lower the frequency, the further it can go and the more it can penetrate. So what I mean by penetration is going through things. So your AM, FM signals are pretty much ubiquitous. They're everywhere. You sort of can't block them easily. Sitting inside your studio here with all of this, equipment and things that are all very electrically noisy, you'll still pick up an AM station or FM station very easily.
Yes.
Because they've got very good penetration through metal, through wood, through ceramics, through things. But the higher the frequency you go, the harder that penetration is. So Wi-Fi is a good example. It starts to get into that area where the signal won't go through things as well as the lower frequencies do. So that's why you'll hear people talking about, it doesn't work very well in my house. I've got, metal studs or
concrete
walls. And it's true. It does. People go, it doesn't make any sense. It is true. The higher the frequency, the harder it is to get through things. So my wonderful, completely timber studded and lined home. At home, I've got one access point that covers the whole house, and it's just excellent. It goes everywhere. I've got nothing that interferes with it or that blocks the signal. Yes, there are other people, my neighbours, interfering with having their systems all set up, and that's where you've got Wi-Fi channels, I guess we're going to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, so there's 13 channels available for 2.4 gigahertz, which is basically different points along the 2.4
baseline
gigahertz
frequencies, yeah. So Dan was talking, his first story, there was frequency hopping. So in general, in the Wi-Fi channels, there's 1 through 13. There's actually more than that, but that's the ones we can use here in New Zealand anyway. It turns out that only 3 of those, 1, 6, and 13, don't overlap.
Yes.
So all of the others overlap, so they're spaced up, but they parts of the allocated section of the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, as they call it, they're over top of each other. So it's
So talking about overlapping, when we're talking about a channel, it's actually a spread of frequencies.
correct, and that's where that spread spectrum comes in that we're talking about. Is because they're using all of those frequencies all at once in that area. So you can see that if you've got people, or your router's on channel 3 and your neighbour's on channel 5 and they're overlapping, you can see that they're busy trying to talk on the frequencies that you are, which means that your computer or your router has to go, oh, that's not something I'm expecting. I didn't hear that thing I was supposed to hear because I had some interference there, it appears. I'll send that again.
Yeah.
So whereas if you specifically go to the point of choosing channels that don't overlap, so your neighbour uses channel 1 and you're using channel 6 and your other neighbour's using channel 13, the chances are you guys won't have any problem at all because you're not actually touching each other's. And proper design and, configuration and layout of Wi-Fi networks does all of this stuff. It's not as easy to get it right with so many different home users with their routers. So.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the home routers do it automatically.
Yeah.
Say at midnight every night. But what happens is that because everyone's hopping on different schedules between the channels, you end up conflicting horribly.
Yeah. Some of the routers, they're better. They're actually looking all the time going, well, actually, that segment over there is better. I'll just shift everyone over there, and the router can busy and say to all the clients, over there, go and use that stuff. We'll go over there. It's quieter. It's like having that conversation. Hey, let's go to the other room. It's quieter in there. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so it starts at 2.412 gigahertz and ends at 2.472 gigahertz. The 2.4 spectrum.
So it's not very big.
No.
When you think about the numbers in gigahertz, but it's actually lots of megahertz because when you do the maths, it's, is it? I can't see it from here. What is it? 2.4 what?
Let me do the maths when the calculator comes up. Oh, apparently you need a new app to open this calculator.
Oh, man.
2472 minus 2412. So it's 60 megahertz.
Yeah. So, let's have a look at it. Think of it another way. 60 megahertz. That, if you bring your spectrum right down to the bottom, and you got your radio stations at about 100 megahertz, as I was talking about earlier, your FM radio stations. From there up to 160 megahertz, you've got aviation, amateur radio, fire, and ambulance up at 160. You've got your broadcast FM stations. So all of these things are fitting in 60 megahertz down there. Their channels are much smaller.
Yeah,
they're red tiny. We're talking kilohertz here of channel size for these guys. But up in the digital space, you need that bandwidth. You need all of that space and that spectrum to be able to send out all of those ones and zeros across lots of frequencies all at once to get that throughput, to get that gigahertz at 802.11ac, which you only get up at 5 gigs because you need the
you need 120 megahertz.
You need the huge amount of space to be able to do that spread spectrum data transfer. So we've talked about it a few times, but it is working all the time, not just on one frequency, but on a lot of frequencies, and it's hopping all the time. So the spread spectrum frequency hopping is just crazy over it's you can't really visualize or explain it because it's just something it's so black box. Even to some of us IT guys, it becomes a black box because it's so complicated, that little segment of this technology.
Yeah, we just accept that it works.
I still like to learn about things like that.
Yeah. The good thing about 5 gigahertz is that there's a lot more megahertz available to spread it out. There's a lot more channels. However, with AC, the latest AC needing 120 megahertz channels, that's also starting to get eaten up a bit.
Yeah, no, it will. Yes.
So that's where 60 gigahertz is starting to be developed.
Yep, and you'll have to be in the same room as the
exactly.
point.
So as you were saying with permeation through
penetration,
objects,
yep.
60 gigahertz is not going to go through a wall.
No, it won't.
But the good thing about that is your neighbour's 60 gigahertz won't come through your walls either.
Correct. That's right.
But you will need an access point in every room of your home for it to work.
Yeah.
But given the way everything's going, that's really the only option.
Yeah. So this also, it goes back, if this little step, everyone was thinking, not everyone, everyone's a, catch-all term here. People were thinking sort of 10 years ago, oh, Wi-Fi is great. I can't wait till it's just Wi-Fi everywhere. We won't have any of these cables or anything, and everything will just be Wi-Fi. No, it's a terrible idea. Absolutely terrible idea. If you can get a wired connection for anything, you should.
Absolutely.
It makes sense for PCs. So if you're, your desktop PC, it makes sense for your VoIP phone, which, might have a place to plug into the, don't put it on Wi-Fi, put it on wire if you can. All of these things that actually do have the option of having a wired connection. The other prime example is your TV. Your brand new smart TV may have an Ethernet port on the back to be able to put a cable in. If you can, do it. It's better than the Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah, streaming movies off Netflix will be so much better.
Yeah, because when you think about it, the amount of data for a video for your TV show, you've got to send all that data to show that picture and the audio and that high quality picture. That's a lot of pixels and it's a lot of data. I'm sure we'll get into talking about in another later episode about video, but it is a lot of data for streaming Netflix. Most people have actually probably had that bill shock, actually, going from doing email and web browsing to, oh, Netflix, this is great. Wow, my bill is huge this month.
Yes.
And that's Netflix. It uses a huge amount of data.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, and your neighbour's doing it, and your other neighbour's doing it, and you've got interference, and you're all trying to do this on Wi-Fi to your smart TV, it's going to stutter, it's going to jitter. Get a nice wired connection in there. Brilliant. Wi-Fi is great for phones, great for tablets, great for laptops, and I think it should be limited to those personally.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the one thing I tell people if they're appearing on a podcast with me remotely. You have to plug your computer in.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, as long as, pretty much any internet connection, even like a plain ADSL connection on the other side of the world, perfectly fine for Skype as long as you've got a cable plugged in.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I thought we'd talk a little bit about long-range Wi-Fi and microwave transmissions, because you kind of hear a bit about both. And microwave is kind of a bit of an annoying term because it's really just individually licensed higher frequencies, basically.
Right.
So, for example, a client...
And sometimes it's not Wi-Fi either. It's another technology, proprietary technology. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, I've got a client that at work that's just put in 11 gigahertz licensed Wi-Fi. And it's amazing. If you're on Wi-Fi at home, you might get, 5 to 10 milliseconds from you to your Wi-Fi router.
Right.
We're getting 2 milliseconds from here to Cromwell.
Right. So there's two factors coming to play here. It's been set up in a line of sight method with really, really highly tuned antennas pointing at each other, and they'll have a fantastic signal between them.
Yeah.
But there's also, they're licensed on their own channel. There's no interference with anyone else.
Yeah.
It's their own little segment of that massive amount of frequency space that is available. So,
and as you mentioned, it's also a proprietary protocol,
right?
Wireless. It's not Wi-Fi.
So that's the thing with wireless, is that it's been designed in such a way that it is the lowest common denominator, right? So it works on most equipment, which means you make a few sacrifices along the way.
Yeah.
But when you're designing the equipment on this end and that end, you can cut corners all you like to get the best throughput you can and not have to worry too much about making sure that everybody else knows how to. But so it's a selling point of your product, right? So
yeah, exactly. You can do long distance with Wi-Fi though. There are a lot of manufacturers out there that do that, and that's where you get wireless internet ISPs.
That's right.
We have a couple of providers in Dunedin actually that do wireless internet all over Otago.
Yep, and there's another couple of providers that aren't actually in Dunedin but are out in Otago and Southland that do the similar thing. So
yeah, but,
and that's not just true of this little area of the world. It's true everywhere.
Yeah. And you have special equipment. It still uses the same protocols, the same 2.4 and 5 gigahertz.
Sometimes with a wee bit of modification by one provider or one manufacturer, means you've got to use that equipment. but you get a little bit of extra throughput.
Yeah, so for example, Ubiquiti have
That's right,
a product called
Airfiber.
MX.
And Airfiber. I think
So Airfiber is 24 gigahertz.
Yep.
Which is also in that license for public use band.
Another one.
Yeah. But the problem with 24 gigahertz and getting up there is that rain actually gets in the way of the radio waves.
For those of you that have a satellite TVs, at home, and you
rain fade.
Yeah, rain fade coming across the TV. This is what I'm talking about, is the bad weather getting in between the two ends of the transmission affecting each other.
Yeah, so instead of, your wall blocking 2.4 gigahertz,
the weather is.
It's the water in the air blocking.
Right.
6 is blocking 24.
Well, that's actually a really important thing to mention. Water is probably one of the best radio signal attenuators out there. You're thinking about submarines and how submarines communicate. They've got radios of a description. They can't actually transmit or talk on what we know as standard radio unless they're surfaced, because the water just completely blocks it out. Underwater, they do have other technologies, but of course, when they're underwater, they kind of want to be quiet and not be found anyway.
Exactly.
But the water is incredibly good radio attenuator. It will kill any signal. So rain is another good example. Yeah,
I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. You think?
Yeah, about the only other thing we haven't really touched on will be security and encryption and things like that.
Yeah, good point.
But it's probably a little bit beyond the scope. The only thing we can really say is if you've got the option to configure, or you do have configured your Wi-Fi, try not to make it open, which is effectively completely open. If you download an email over an open Wi-Fi connection, someone in between with a little antenna listening to the airwaves can actually look and actually see your email passing them and actually read it. Whereas if you go to one of the encrypted or secure Wi-Fi's with a wee padlock on it on your laptop, that's actually encrypting end to end the transmission over the air. So there's an old technology called WEP. There's some very good other uses. It's originally stood for wireless encryption protocol, I think.
Something like that.
Like that. But there's lots of other. If you go and look up WEP now, you'll find lots of joke versions of it, which would basically indicate that it's not secure at all anymore.
Aha. Wired equivalent privacy, which is quite ironic.
Exactly. It's so it's no good anymore. WEP is not something you want to use. If someone's got the ability and wants to, your WEP encryption can be reversed very quickly. We're talking minutes.
Yes.
And all the people have to do is just have to listen to you doing some stuff on your wireless network, and a few minutes later they'll have what they need to be able to basically then decrypt on the fly and actually read everything you're doing. If you can, make sure you're using at least WPA2 or better.
Yes. Yeah,
because I say or better because there will be something new down the line that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
but so WPA2 is the current thing. Oh, and we should get into passwords at some point as well, actually, and explaining how passwords and hashes and things like that work.
Yeah.
That should be another good episode to do. Dan's writing it down. Your password shouldn't be a common word, a name, or a dictionary word, or and don't change letters for numbers and numbers for letters, because that's all predictable. All the guys that are busy trying to find passwords, they use those, they know all those. Just use 4 random words that mean nothing together. Battery horse correct staple, for example.
Yeah.
Which is another XKCD cartoon. There's many websites out there to generate that, and those are the most secure form of password. Is something that's just words, really easy to remember, can type it really easily, totally unrelated. Yeah,
a big point for password security is not the password itself, but how easy it is for you to remember.
That's true.
Because writing it down, not a good idea. Though I know everyone goes, don't write it down, but if you're in your own home and you write it down, the chances of someone getting it and also knowing all your password, all your logins is pretty remote.
That's
but
right.
You still shouldn't do it.
No, you shouldn't really write it down, but at home it's probably more of an issue when you write it down, the one that you use on your phone everywhere, or the one that's at work that you shouldn't really have written down, that's got access to all of the other employees, employment information, or their or pay salaries and things like that.
Yeah.
HR people shouldn't really. Anyway. Yeah,
so that talking about open Wi-Fi, it's not as common these days anymore for there to be lots of open Wi-Fi at homes because the routers generally come by default. But we use it a lot as free Wi-Fi.
Yes, that's right. Like your hotel Wi-Fi or your city free Wi-Fi or your library Wi-Fi, they're quite often open. So the only thing to really say is if you're going to use those is be very careful about what you're doing over them. You don't want to be using passwords over them if you can avoid it, unless that password is being entered into an encrypted web page, with your wee green padlock on the side nowadays and the wee HTTPS in the corner. If you see that and it's encrypted and it's where you'd normally enter in your bank details or your credit card details to buy something, that's generally fine. But probably shouldn't be downloading your email with an email app because more often than not that's not configured right and it's not secure.
Not encrypted.
Not encrypted. So you want to try and protect yourself on these. So I think we can come away and just say try and use the best encryption or security method available on your router. WPA2's got a couple of different options. One of them is enterprise. Most people will not use that. It'll be businesses. The one that most people will have is WPA2 personal, which is where you literally just enter in
password
or pre-shared key. They call it PSK. And that's what you enter into each computer, and that's fine. We've got a later episode where we're going to talk about encryption, so we'll go into that a little bit more then. But at this stage, if you've got Wi-Fi at home, please set it up to be secure.
I think that's a great place to end. Thanks,
and
Mike.
Don't speed test over Wi-Fi.
Exactly.
Righto, folks.
All right.
Till next time.